As Asian Americans face racist attacks, a PBS series celebrates their unsung history by Jane Yamato, LA Times. Like many immigrant children, Daniel Jane Kim didn't learn of the hard-won American dream that brought his parents to the United States until later in life. He was a teenager when they finally told him their story, one that resembled those chronicled in a PBS five-part docuseries, Asian Americans, a landmark program spanning 150 years that couldn't arrive at a more timely moment. They described how, when he was 1 year old, they'd come to the US from South Korea with just $200. Eventually, the family put down roots in Pennsylvania. From that, they built a whole life for themselves and raised three happy, healthy children, one of who is fortunate enough to speak to you right now, said Kim, known for his roles on Lost and Hawaii 520. Tammy Tomato was a junior high student in the San Fernando Valley when she learned that America had incarcerated 120,000 persons of Japanese descent, including U.S.-born Japanese American citizens during World War II. The Joy Luck Club actress would later launch her career with Karate Kid Part 2 that helped tell stories of internment on screen. On that day, she went home and asked her father, an LAPD officer, "Did this happen to you?" He said, "Yes," Tomato remembered. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" As long as Asians have been in the United States, they have helped shape its history, but have often been left out of the lessons taught in schools. At home, family histories often go unspoken by older generations who strove through xenophobia, racist legislation, migratory waves, societal shifts, wars, and their aftermath in the pursuit of happiness. Asian Americans, a premiere Monday, aims to rewrite that history in vibrant detail, narrated by Kim and Tomita. It highlights milestones in the history of the country's fastest growing demographic, a sprawling group in itself, comprising diverse origin countries, languages, and histories, with the help of Asian American scholars, historians, and artists like Harry Gondabulu, Virat Than Nguyen, and Randall Park, as well as the descendants of subjects who fought to be seen as more than foreigners in the country they call home. We have tried to do an Asian American history series for years and years, said Academy Award-nominated filmmaker and UCLA professor Rani Tarjamapina, the producer of Asian Americans. Airing during Asia Pacific American Heritage Month, the series has taken on even greater urgency amid rising anti-Asia sentiment in America because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Asian Americans are really galvanized, and the series is blurring into the conversation of where do we go next? What does this moment mean? Said Tarjima Pino, who assembled a filmmaking team that included Liu Chuyan, Gator Gambai, and Grace Lee. The evolution of Grace Lee box to condense an ambitious overview of Asian Americana into 5-hour-long segments. It doesn't feel like we are finished with the series, she said. It feels like we are starting this whole new conversation. In addition to validating the experiences of Asian Americans throughout history, she said, it was important to draw connections between Asian Americans and other communities throughout the series. That's why the series finds parallels between the murder of Vincent Chin, a Chinese-American man who was mistaken for Japanese and beaten to death by white men in Detroit in 1982, and the 1991 killing of a 15-year-old African-American girl, Natasha Harris, by a Korean store owner in Los Angeles, which preceded the Rodney King verdict and exhibited tensions between the Black and the Korean communities during the 1992 LA riots. Tajman Pinner, Oscar-nominated for her 1987 documentary about Chin's murder, says the recent killing of the 25-year-old Georgian man, Ahmaud Arbery, deserves to be met with the same public outrage by all communities who have been victimized, scapegoating racism and violence. For Asian Americans, the Vincent Chin story is often this touchstone, but you can't evoke the name and the story of Vincent Chin when there are Ahmaud Arbery's happening to black and brown people, said Tarjma Pino. For Asian Americans, if we stand up for Vincent Chin, we have to stand up for the Michael Browns, the Eric Garners, and the Ahmaud Arbery's. But we don't always do that. Asian Americans also feels timely to Kim. In March, actor, producer, and director went public with a COVID-19 diagnosis as incidents of anti-Asian violence and harassment were on the rise, targeting Asians as scapegoats for the virus. Being Asian American has been the source of some of my greatest pride and the greatest pain, he said in an email, which means having the benefits of two amazing cultures and at times feeling like you are a true member of neither. The story I feel a particular connection to right now is the murder of Vincent Chin. He said, I can't help but see a parallel between his story and the tragic murder of Ahmaud Arbery. To be explicitly clear, I'm not equating the African American experience to that of Asian Americans as a general rule. Our histories are very specific and worthy of respect for their own unique reasons, but seeing two young men murdered for no other reason, the color of their skin, and then watching the justice system fail them is a fresh reminder of how far we have to go as a country. Moving from the 19th century to the present, Asian Americans relate the remarkable stories of notable early Asian migrants. Antero Cabrera, brought from the Philippines to be displayed in a replica Igorot village at the 1904 World's Fair, is remembered by his granddaughter, who knows how he found agency amid the ordeal and started a family in the U.S. Other figures highlighted include Indian-American writer Bagat Singh Tin, who fought for the United States in World War I and was denied citizenship twice because he was not white. The Chinese laborers who gave their sweat and sometimes lives to building American railroads but were largely erased from the photographs of its completion. And Moqsad Ali, a Bengali Muslim trader who arrived in the 1800s and married an African-American woman named Ella Blackman in New Orleans, where his modern-day descendants revisited their multiracial roots on screen. In subsequent episodes, the series tracks the American-born generations whose lives were upturned by a country that questioned their loyalty. The model minority myth that pitted good Asian Americans against other communities of color, the emergence of new alliances and political heroes in the civil rights, farmer worker and ethnic studies movement, and the later arrivals of their new immigrants and refugees who carved out their own spaces in the changing American landscape. Tomita, of Japanese and Filipino descent, narrates a chapter about the impact of World War II on the Yuno family, divided by war and incarceration. Tulare-born activist Satsuki Aona, now a prominent voice in the fight to end child detention, and Korea-American siblings Philip and Susan An, who fought the Japanese Empire by serving in Hollywood and the military respectively. She thought back to the day she learned of her own father's story and how the lesson informed her on lasting awareness. It was my first awakening to this wrong chapter, the wrong acts committed to our government. How it makes you feel hate and shame, she said. That sparked my interest in knowing what happened to my father and to my father's family and other families of Japanese descent, and then other families who now continue to be incarcerated and imprisoned in what they call migrant detention centers. The international trauma that we still witness, I still feel it. I still feel it. I hope I don't pass it along to my niece and nephews, but I need to pass along this story so they know it happened and to ensure that it won't happen again. Finding fascinating threads of the Asian American tapestry was easy, said Torjima Pina. Bringing those stories to life in a visual medium was another story. It was really a bear to find archive materials because for the most part Asian Americans were not pictured, she said. I have seen so many films about, for example, the strikes at San Francisco State and Berkeley. You never see Asians in these films. I used to wonder because I knew people who were there, who were a part of the strikes. I thought, did they cut out the Asians or did they not even film them? To find footage of Pastor Mink, the Hawaii-born politician who became the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman elected to Congress in 1964. The team sought out footage from the 1960 Democratic National Convention where, according to a contemporary newspaper account, she had given a rousing speech that helped persuade the party to stay the course in the fight for civil rights. We knew parts of the convention were televised, so we kept on looking, Torjima Pina said. I said, find out the day and specifically who was white and speaking around the same time. Looking for them and look through the footage to see if you spot her, and that's how they found her. The filmmakers tapped specialty community collections from the Japanese American National Museum and the Museum of Chinese in America in New York before part of its vast archive was damaged in a fire in January. They also asked people to look in their basements for private troves of home videos, photographs, and media that they dusted off, digitized, and preserved as part of the project. They turned to authors like Vivek Bhatt, who chronicled the story of Moqsad Ali in his book Bengali Harlem and the Lost Histories of South Asia American, and whose work has been vital in establishing the recorded histories of individuals across the spectrum of the Asian American experience. We know that Asian Americans are not just East Asia, and we couldn't do the theories without telling those stories, said Torjima Pina. And they invited Asian American figures like Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Nguyen, whose family arrived in the United States in 1975 as refugees from the Vietnam War, to share their own personal histories. The sympathizer author grew up in St. Louis, where his parents opened a grocery store, and he remembered anti-Vietnamese signs posted around their neighborhood sent a stock message to people like him. My parents worked 12 to 14 hours days. My parents worked 12 to 14-hour days in this store almost every day of the year. My parents were shot in that store on Christmas Eve, he says in the docuseries, becoming visibly emotional. I swore one day that I would have an opportunity to rewrite that sign, to write another story. Learning about the battles waged and won by predecessors in the Asian American community as well as his own industry, like trailblazing actors Susan Hayakawa, Anna May Wong, and Bruce Lee, is a source of inspiration and encouragement, says Kim. Knowing they charted a path where there was none fuels the fire for me to believe in what's possible, he says. The challenges they faced to pave the way for people like me should never be forgotten. After all, you have to know where you started to know how far you have come. I'm sure that's on a fortune cookie somewhere, another Asian American creation, by the way.